rolling.
All right, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I am Linda Durhack, the Renewable Energy Outreach Associate here at Illinois Extension and your moderator for this webinar today. Today, we will be discussing strategies for building resilience, which will cover the BRIC grant, green infrastructure, and hazard mitigation planning. This webinar is co-sponsored by Prairie Rivers Network and the Great Lakes Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center with funding from US EPA and the Department of Energy. We are recording this webinar, and you will get a link to the recording and contact information for the speakers in the next couple of days. You can also find local government education webinars on our YouTube channel. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We will have 3 speakers. Each will present, and then we will take questions at the end of the presentations. If you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we will share questions with the speakers during the Q&A at the end. Depending on the question, speakers may answer in the chat as well. And so as you can see, Zach Krug will be presenting first about the BRIC grant, and then Eliana Brown will discuss nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, and then Russell Medley will discuss hazard mitigation planning and community organizations active in disaster. So before our first speaker gets started, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Great Lakes Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. So this serves EPA Region 5, and it is designed to get state and federal funds in the hands of local communities to plan for and implement projects that improve community well-being, infrastructure, and economic development. It's headquartered at the University of Minnesota, and Illinois Extension and Prairie Rivers Networks have partnered to provide assistance to the Illinois state. And so here's just some examples of the services we provide. So there's grant navigation, grant review, project planning and development, post-grant support, partnership referrals, and more. So if you have a project and you're looking for funding to support it, you can reach out to us and we can help you with that. Or if you already know of a grant and you just want assistance applying, we can also support as well. And if you're interested in any of the funding opportunities we share on this webinar series, please feel free to reach out to us. So I will put our intake form in the chat as well as our newsletter if you just want to stay informed about upcoming funding opportunities. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Zach Krug serves as the Hazard Mitigation Section Manager at the Illinois Emergency Agency and the Office of Homeland Security. He will share information about the BRIC grant and how communities can apply. He has worked in hazard mitigation for 10 plus years. Prior to working for the state of Illinois, Mr. Krug worked for the health department in the city of St. Louis. And he has a bachelor's degree in political science from SIUE and a master's degree in environmental studies from UIS. And I will go ahead and turn it over to him now. Things happen. So we will go ahead and just have our second speaker start us off here. We will have Eliana Brown. She is a water quality and stormwater specialist here at Illinois Extension with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant as well. And she will share case studies and examples of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. She provides programming about water issues, including stormwater management and flood risk reduction. She leads the development of water outreach materials, serves as the director of the Red Oak Rain Garden, and coordinates the Rainscaping Education Program and the Illinois-Indiana Master Watershed Program for Illinois, and chairs the Urban Stormwater Working Group for the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. She is very busy. Eliana holds a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering with a focus on water quality and treatment from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And she is certified through the National Green Infrastructure Program and is an Illinois Master Gardener. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Eliana. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you all for attending and for this opportunity to talk about nature-based solutions in the context of flood risk reduction. So I am actually going to wave to you all, but then turn off my video to save a little bandwidth here. Go. So what are nature-based solutions? And just so you're aware, I use nature-based solutions and green stormwater infrastructure kind of interchangeably. So I may, throughout this talk, I may say nature-based solutions, I may say green stormwater infrastructure, but basically meaning the same thing. These are practices that integrate natural features and processes into disaster risk reduction, creating sustainable and cost-effective ways to protect people and property. These solutions protect communities from natural hazards while offering co-benefits like cleaner air, cooler cities, and healthy ecosystems. Of course, in the context here of flooding, I want to give a couple of definitions here. Localized flooding is what happens when rainfall overwhelms the drainage system capacity. You can see a photo on the right. This little storm drain is looking like it may not be able to keep up with the rain that's happening here, while riverine floods happen when river flows are exceeding the capacity of a river channel. You can improve the stormwater and floodplain management with nature-based solutions to build the community resilience for both of these kinds of flooding. Today, I'm going to focus on nature-based solutions that address localized flooding. So with these nature-based solutions, green stormwater infrastructure, what we're really trying to do is to capture stormwater before it gets to the storm drain and allow it to either soak into the ground or be utilized where it lands. The goal is not to entirely replace our conventional stormwater infrastructure. Our detention ponds and storm sewers can stay in place. It would be very expensive to replace those, but what we want to think of instead is that we are utilizing nature-based solutions to complement this existing system and build resilience. So in this picture on the right, there is, I don't believe it's in this actual photo, but there is a storm drain on down the street, and this rain garden allows the water to infiltrate. What they've done here is created a curb cut to let some of the stormwater from the street come in. It goes through into this rain garden, and then anything, if it's a larger storm, any excess that's not infiltrated into the ground would go back out into the street and then could go to that storm drain. So you can have both systems kind of layered on top of one another within a town and city. Away from paved surfaces and storm drains. So in this photo here on the right, you can see the roof raindrop, or the rainfall that is running off from the roof is going into this downspout. And before it would get to the road, it's getting intercepted by this rain garden and allowed to soak into the ground. The idea here is that we are slowing it down, soaking it into the ground, or it could be utilized in other ways with other kinds of practices. Some of the kinds of practices include rainwater harvesting, such as rain barrels or cisterns, rain gardens. Many of you have probably heard of rain gardens, permeable pavement, constructed wetlands, stormwater trees, and green roofs are some that we will talk about here today. Many of these are engineered practices that mimic ecological functions of a natural landscape. Again, if you're going to learn anything from what I'm talking about, is that these practices slow down the water's path to the storm system, let it go into the ground, or utilize it in other ways. A little bit of a focus on each one of these practices. I am going to presume that you're familiar with rain barrels, been around for a while, and they can be really great because they're pretty inexpensive to buy a rain barrel, get into a rain barrel. There are some downsides that I want to mention, though. They are small. Most of them are only 55 gallons, and they can fill up really quickly. If they don't have something like mosquito dunk in them, there can be mosquitoes around them if the water isn't used within 48 to 72 hours. And if it's not used and there's an overflow, that overflow could potentially cause some issues to the building foundation right up next to it. So an overflow is pretty important. It's also important to keep this maintained. This particular rain garden has this nice feature being able to have that switch on the top, have it come out of service in the winter time. That those are some nice features of this one. But rain barrels can be a really great way for municipalities to introduce the topic of stormwater management to residents. Next, I'll talk about bioretention and two practices here, rain gardens and bioswales that I'm going to mention. Rain gardens here are defined as a shallow basin that allows that stormwater runoff to be captured and infiltrate into the ground, replenishing groundwater. You see the rainwater runoff is coming into the deepest part of the basin, soaking into the ground. And there's a carefully selected palette of plants that are used for rain gardens. They have to be able to survive times of inundation and drought, especially these ones here that are in the basin in this wetter part of the rain garden. So some knowledge of plants, and particularly native plants, is required for selecting these kinds of plants, but they are very much worth it. These plants have these extensive root systems that enhance the soil's ability to be able to soak up rainwater. If you can see here just the amount of roots that we have within or under the surface of a rain garden versus the more shallow kinds of roots that you have with turf grass over here. And an estimate is that a rain garden is going to be able to absorb 30% more water than the equivalent area of lawn. So they can have some very nice eco services for us and a nice ability to absorb that water. That water, of course, this is water that would not be going into somebody's basement, would not be causing street flooding. So instead, it's watering a beautiful garden, and that can be just a very nice thing. You'd want to have a series of these kinds of rain gardens in order to be able to handle a large amount of rainfall. That's something I always talk to people and remind people of, that one rain garden is a very good thing. A series of rain gardens is a great thing. A bioswale is similar to a rain garden in that if I had a cross section of this bioswale, it could look very similar to the cross section of a rain garden. The difference here is that we have it's a kind of an elongated rain garden. You can think of it in that way. Not only is stormwater runoff being allowed to infiltrate into the soil, but it is being conveyed into a direction, just like a normal swale would be able to do. But of course, we have that extra value of allowing that infiltration to happen. Some bioswales will have check dams, so that you would really be able to hold that water back to allow it to sink into the ground. And for with rain barrels, I mentioned mosquitoes. So the same thing holds with rain gardens and bioswales, in that you would, with these practices, they are designed for the water to have infiltrated and be gone within 48 to 72 hours, so that mosquitoes would not be a problem. And so the location either would need to have soils that can pass an infiltration test, or there are engineered soils which would have to be put in before the plants go in order to meet that criteria. And move on here to permeable pavement. That's a type of hard surface that allows rainfall to percolate to an underlying reservoir base where rainfall's either infiltrated to that underlying soil or removed by a subsurface drain. They can be used for parking lots, sidewalks, driveways, patios, and lower traffic roads. They are not ideal for high traffic or high speed areas because it has a lower load bearing capacity than conventional pavement. There are a number of different kinds of permeable pavement. These are pavers, as you see here. There's also pervious concrete, can be called thirsty concrete, and porous asphalt. An advantage of the pavers is in case there is, if there was maybe some clogging that happens, you would only have to remove the pavers where the clogging is happening for any kind of repair. So here I'll talk about green and blue roofs. Green roof is a layer of vegetation that's planted over a waterproofing system that's installed on top of a flat or slightly sloped roof. Blue roof doesn't have vegetation, it just has rooftop detention. They are designed to provide initial temporary water storage and then a gradual release of stored water. Green roofs and blue roofs are generally more expensive per gallon retained than the land practices are. So they tend to be used in bigger cities, higher population areas where you just don't have the space on the land to be able to put in nature-based solutions. So I've been talking about these kind of more engineered solutions, but I always want to mention stormwater trees. Trees can be very important tools for us to be able to soak up additional stormwater runoff. Floodplain trees are frequently used as street trees to be able to have this kind of service. They capture and store rainfall in the canopy, and then they release water through evapotranspiration. The roots take up water and help create conditions in soil that promote infiltration. According to the Arbor Day Foundation, depending on size, gallons or more, at least until it reaches saturation, which is about after 1 or 2 inches of rainfall. If you're multiplying this by the number of trees in a community, the interception and redistribution can be significant. It's estimated that the urban forest can reduce annual stormwater runoff by 2 to 7%. So they can be very good. There is an engineered practice that is called a tree trench, which is a system of trees that is connected by an underground structure that filters stormwater. Those are generally more prevalent usage in larger areas with more urban development. Also going to talk about here stormwater wetlands. These are fundamentally different than natural wetland systems. Engineers design them specifically to treat stormwater, and they typically have less biodiversity than a natural wetland, both in terms of plant and animal life. There are several variations of stormwater wetlands, differing in relative amounts of dry, shallow, and deep water zones. One of the nice benefits of a stormwater wetland is that it is larger scale and can capture and store stormwater from a neighborhood, which is this one that is pictured here is a neighborhood in Champaign. There are a number of co-benefits that in addition to helping with flooding that I want to mention. These practices do help with improving downstream water quality, but there are also these co-benefits here on the right of improving community livability that I think would be important for this audience. improving aesthetics and having increased recreational opportunities, reducing noise pollution. There's community cohesion, um, and there's these opportunities for public education. So nature-based solutions and green infrastructure that could be used just at a typical house. Some opportunities here that would be, want to note on here, the driveway could be replaced with permeable pavement, could be a rain garden here in the front lawn. We want to conserve those trees. Shrubs, prairies, and meadows are also very helpful. And a rain barrel could be added to that storm drain at the side of the building. Now, for this particular house, how much water are we actually talking about? Well, with just a 1-inch rain in the calculation here, this house could have 744 gallons of stormwater runoff that that would be coming off of this house going into the storm drain, and perhaps with a whole neighborhood, we could have inundation of an overwhelming the storm drain that could cause that localized flooding. Now, when we're talking about our commercial areas, it's very large. There's a lot of amount of stormwater runoff that can come off of them. Just the roof off of a typical commercial building would have this 137,000 gallons, and the parking lot coming close to 220,000 gallons. So that's a lot of stormwater runoff. Case study I want to mention here to address some localized flooding. This was in Ramsey County, Minnesota. They selected these kinds of green infrastructure practices. A couple here that I didn't mention, but you can also have some underground storage and infiltration that can come from large pipes. They did happen to use that in this system. With this particular system that they have here, they have estimated reduction runoff volumes for rain gardens at their series of rain gardens, I should say, at 88%. Their underground infiltration trenches, 77%. Their underground storage and infiltration at 100%, and their regional stormwater pond reducing it by 5%. And in looking at the difference between installing their green infrastructure from an all gray infrastructure alternative, they saved an estimated $500,000 for those two options. And this is a picture of one of their streets with their system of rain gardens. You can see it's really beautiful. This is a quote from their division manager in that area, that it not only does it solve the flooding, but and help the water quality issues for their lake, but it really beautifies the community. Some resources I want to provide for you here. Of course, you can either have this use the QR code, or maybe we could send them the links here. But FEMA does have a really nice resource that includes descriptions and the economic benefits and some other case studies for nature-based solutions. We also have the Wisconsin Sea Grant has this nice publication of tackling barriers to green infrastructure. Linda mentioned that I am certified from NGICP, and you can be too. Here's a link for how you access that organization. And I also wanted to provide a link here to the Illinois Urban Manual that describes a lot of these practices. We do have an extension, a website called Illinois Groundwork that has a resource library that can help with decision making on green stormwater infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And I think that may be my last slide. Of course, you would want to be working with an engineering firm, a planning firm, to help figure out what would be the best suite of practices for your own community. you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at brown12@illinois.edu. And thank you all so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Eliana Brown, for that very helpful and insightful presentation. And we will have time for Q&A at the end if any of you do have more questions for her. So I will go ahead and introduce our third speaker, Russell Medley. He is a community and economic development educator with Illinois Extension and will discuss hazard mitigation planning. He has 25 years of experience in urban planning and in the economic development fields, with stints as a planner and analyst for a county government, and as an economic development specialist and marketing and research director for a countywide economic development organization in the Chicago suburbs. Medley focuses on workforce development, disaster preparedness planning, rural and urban planning, and the development and quantification of economic development strategies for municipal and regional entities. Medley received his Bachelor's of Arts from Knox College and holds a Master's of Science degree in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Iowa. Now I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Russell.
All right, thank you, Linda. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great, fantastic. So yes, my name is Russell Medley. I'm a community economic development educator at the University of Illinois Extension. And I would like to welcome you to this presentation. So I'm going to be talking about hazard mitigation planning and also COADs. I was asked to talk about COADs. And I was hoping we were going to have an opening statement about the BRICS grant, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, because I referred to it several times during my presentation. So just to get started, okay. Okay, so no amount of recovery can substitute for preparedness and mitigation. So this is something that we're taught in planning school as well, as being taught through hazard mitigation planning. When I was in planning school, they told us that land use regulations are cheaper than rebuilding. So this also applies in hazard mitigation planning. Being prepared and mitigating for disasters upfront saves lives, saves money, and reduces injuries. So what is hazard mitigation? What is a hazard mitigation plan? So it's basically your strategy, a jurisdictional strategy to minimize disaster losses, create actions that minimize disaster losses and breaks the cycle of disasters, reconstruction, repeated rebuilding from disasters. So with a hazard mitigation plan, what you do is you identify your risk, the most likely risks that are going to impact your community, your county in particular. Assess those risks, see how vulnerable you are to those risks, develop mitigation actions, and communicate those priorities amongst the community and also stakeholders, state, FEMA, those types of stakeholders. So mitigation is ongoing effort to lessen the impact of disasters. In this best case scenario, effective mitigation leads to nothing, which that means there's no loss of property or life. So each jurisdiction or community must identify their own particular mitigation projects that best suit them. On this slide, you'll see the major categories of mitigation. Some are costly and some are free and some are in between. Just so you know, if you want BRIC funding, your projects must be listed in your hazard mitigation plan, and that plan must be officially adopted by your county and the jurisdictions within the county that participate in the plan. So quickly, just going over the features of a hazard mitigation plan, that you will submit, you're going to describe your planning process. The planning process is you describe how your plan's prepared, who was involved, who was invited to be among the jurisdictions in your county, who was invited, the number of meetings you had, and the use of your prior meetings or prior plans that you already had in place. In terms of public participation, you want to cover what is the geographic area that we are focusing on. So usually in Illinois' case, it's a county. Who is appointed from each jurisdiction within the county to participate? How is the public informed? how are state local agencies included, and how are neighboring jurisdictions informed about that, and also the public. And you also want to keep in mind that you probably want 2 public meetings. That is a requirement, but FEMA and IEMA do stress that you should have all public meetings when you're going through this process. Hazard identification and risk assessment, HIRA. This is where you identify the specific hazards that are endemic to your community. So if you're in Western Illinois, obviously flooding, especially if you're against the Mississippi River, flooding is going to be endemic. You may not cover earthquakes in your hazard mitigation plan. So these are the specific hazards that impact your community. And then with the vulnerability assessment, you're going to describe the jurisdiction's vulnerability, each of these identified risks, and describe the impact of these risks in terms of what damage they could do in dollar amounts, in loss of life, injuries, so forth. And the next section is your mitigation goals, objectives, actions, and projects. And so this is the meat and potatoes of a hazard mitigation plan. This is where you set about the mitigation, you set the mitigation goals, and you talk about the projects that you want to include in your hazard mitigation plan that can be funded through perhaps FEMA or IEMA funding, or you can enact it locally. So you don't actually, you'll have mitigation goals. Depending on the size of your community, you may have mitigation goals, objectives, and actions, or mitigation goals and objectives and projects. It just depends on how you want to set it up. In terms of plan maintenance, this is how you evaluate your plan. You write down, this is how we're going to evaluate it, how we are going to schedule plans or schedule meetings to evaluate, how we will use our local mechanisms such as permitting and planning to enact this, and how the plan will be incorporated into our existing local plans that are already in the county. Then submitting the plan for review. I think that's really just, you need to have 4 copies and submit those to FEMA and IEMA for review. Also have a crosswalk that shows where the state and FEMA requirements have been met in the plan, show that. And adoption. So once all this, you go through all this, FEMA approves, the plan must be formally approved by jurisdictions by all the jurisdictions that participated by resolution. So that was a very fast look at the hazard mitigation process. So going on to the talked about that are going to be in the plan. So every 5 years, counties have to update their plans. So in 2023, Illinois Extension worked with IEMA to update the state natural hazard mitigation plan. We didn't change much, but these are the 4 goals that we have here. So just so you know, every 5 years you have to update this. So these are the plans that you're going to hang or these are the goals you're going to hang your plans off of. But in many counties, you all have plans. I'm sure you all have hazard mitigation plans. There may be 1 county or 2 counties in Illinois that don't have them. But often your emergency manager or your emergency management office usually do these plans. They also can get assistance from your regional planning commissions and also private consultants. And on some occasions, Illinois Extension does help as well. So for 2023, one thing that FEMA did ask us to do when looking at the goals was to include focus on nature-based solutions and also on vulnerable populations. And also they did suggest that we beef up sections focused on earthquake awareness, earthquakes, and wildfires. So I'm going to go through each of these goals, just talk about them and talk about some of the projects could fall under them. A lot of those projects could be funded through BRIC. So the first goal is protect Illinois residents from natural hazards. And this is really where you protect lives. This goal is focused on protecting the lives. And also in this section is kind of where we talked about protecting the most vulnerable populations. So vulnerable populations from our standpoint are communities with More senior population, maybe they are isolated, maybe they live on farms and more rural in nature, or counties that might have an institutional population, a prison or a college or a university where you have a conglomeration of people in one location. Also could mean immigrant or neighborhoods where there's a large number of disadvantaged people or immigrants who are limited English proficiency. So that's in goal one. And what some of the projects that could fall under this goal include maybe implementing public warning systems, acquisitions or buyouts for flood-prone homes, constructing tornado shelters, putting generators in public buildings that might be used as shelters or as heating and warming centers, structural retrofits of buildings against flooding and wind resistance or seismic resistance. Goal two is really focused on more of the infrastructure, more of property. So create systemic efforts to lessen the vulnerability of the state to natural hazards and risks associated with them. So these projects, most likely that you would undertake under this goal would probably be focused on more traditional stormwater infrastructure projects, but also the implementation of the nature-based solutions or green infrastructure that Eliana was talking about. This could possibly mean, layering bioswales, rain gardens, or permeable pavers in order to absorb stormwater and protect existing infrastructure from being overwhelmed. Another project under this goal probably would be either updating your building codes or getting building codes. It also includes encouraging the use of the National Flood Insurance Program and the implementation of floodplain regulations within counties. Goal three is it's improved coordination, capacity, communications, and partnerships among jurisdictions and agencies to support mitigation efforts. So this one is more of working locally, communicating, building capacity, developing those partnerships with the state and local officials, and also in local areas, developing those relationships. So under this, an example of a project could be developing a COAD, a community organizations active in disaster, or creation of a community emergency response team or a medical reserve corps. It could also include maybe developing a geographic information system to map county floodplains and wetlands, incorporate those into planning decisions, or even just putting together disaster mitigation workshops to share with other jurisdictions who are surrounding or even within your county. The fourth and final is increased public understanding, support, and education for hazard mitigation planning projects. It's probably the easiest one to do and the most cost effective and probably the most effective. This is basically doing public awareness campaigns. It could be social media, it could be email, it could be anywhere, or newsletters, things like that. It could be, especially in Southern Illinois, earthquake awareness, putting on an earthquake awareness campaign. It could be social media campaigns focused on how to deal with extreme heat or extreme cold, those types of things. So, and these are very cost effective, obviously don't cost a lot, and can be implemented very easily. So once you have your plan, one of the things that you need to do is make sure you have an annual meeting every year to review your plan to make sure you're meeting your objectives, or there might be look at the status of the projects that you're implementing, or look at or work on grant funding or grant applications to secure funding for the projects that have been listed in your plan. Another thing I'm just going to put I'm just going to put something here. This is to transition into COADs. So another thing would be to form a county or multi-county COAD, or that could be a long-term recovery group. I know that there's we have COADs across the state. We also have long-term recovery groups. So we'll talk about COADs, long-term recovery groups next. Okay, so what is a COAD or long-term recovery group? It's basically a collaborative network of organizations, agencies, individuals, businesses, and others who are interested in a particular community or geographic area who want to work together to minimize the effects of a disaster. So they function to support the emergency manager. So the emergency manager, the emergency management office, law enforcement, they're going to be too busy. And in case of a disaster, they need assistance from other volunteers to help during such an event. So they operate exclusively in the recovery space. So when a disaster happens, that's when recovery starts. But this statement here kind of means that COAD members, long-term recovery group members, are not going to be the ones who are digging people out of a building or rescuing people off the roofs of houses. They're going to be doing other things. And every COAD or long-term recovery group looks different. It's based on what you need, what's available in your county. So what does a COAD or a long-term recovery group do? Well, they help with the other volunteers. So not spontaneous volunteers who show up to help, such as during a flood, the sandbagging portion. So they manage those volunteers. They train those volunteers. They have a location for those volunteers, and they track the volunteers. COADs manage and accept donations. They work with Red Cross to set up shelters. They communicate these actions to the public or train the public and provide information, disaster preparedness education to the public. And with a long-term recovery committee, you focus on COADs focus on unmet needs that may not be covered during a disaster, after disaster. So that might be someone has trees down in their yard, and the COAD will help find resources to help individuals in that situation. So it's looking for other resources and helping to apply for grants for recovery. And this is also, they also do a lot of case management. So the types of organizations involved in COADs or long-term recovery groups, it's the gamut. It's anyone interested. So I put extension up there because we help form a lot of COADs. I think right now in the state, there's 12 COADs and there's 9 being formed. And additionally, I think there's 3 or 4 long-term recovery groups that are in the area, in the state. So we have been working with them. But in terms of the other organizations, obviously you're going to have American Red Cross, Salvation Army, United Way, those types of organizations, your legal aid, faith-based organizations, community foundations, civic organizations. Anyone can be involved. So from a standpoint of what would a COAD cover? What type of a committee structure would you have? Usually with a COAD, what you really need is, say, a long-term recovery committee, or if you're a long-term recovery group, that's what they do. They're long-term recovery. But for a COAD, a long-term recovery group that might have a fiscal sponsor who can apply for grants. So you don't have to be an official 501c3. But from the other standpoint of COADs, the other you might want to have are donations and volunteer. And donations, they need to kind of be separate, because once a disaster happens, donations overwhelm a lot of emergency management offices during that time. So we try to keep that separate. We keep that as a COAD function. The other functional areas, and this is not an end-all be-all list, agriculture, especially in rural areas, to communicate with the farm population, the rural population, about what they need to do to protect themselves, and animal management. This is for companion animals and also livestock. How do you protect those companion animals and livestock during a disaster? What do you do after disaster? Emotional and spiritual care. This can be taken over by faith-based, or if you have a mental health facility or mental health counselors in your community. Long-term recovery committee, again, unmet needs, applying for grants, case management, mass care, that's usually housing, sheltering, and that's usually have American Red Cross do that. Program outreach, education membership, that's basically training, working with other organizations and providing information and training on disaster preparedness. Public information, communications, marketing, this is very important. If you want to get people prepared and trained and ready to react during disaster, you need to publicize that information, get that information out there. Also, you need to have a way to communicate information during a disaster. And we already talked about volunteer management. So the best way to prepare is obviously you have a hazard mitigation plan. Look at your hazard mitigation plan and see what you can do to mitigate what disasters, what are most likely to happen in your community. Create the ongoing conversation. And you also do some disaster preparedness. Educate the members of your community. And like I said, a COAD could be one county, multiple counties, whatever, but educate them on how they can protect themselves during a disaster and what they should do after disaster. And it's best to have these conversations when nothing's happening. It's too late once something's happened and you try, okay, we need to organize this. It's too late at that point and it's not going to work. All officials need to be knowledgeable of this. I'm really shocked sometimes when we talk about hazard mitigation planning that a lot of county officials don't know that this falls under their purview. And you just work with your local business organizations, residents to ensure everyone's prepared. So that is my presentation. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Russell, for that presentation. That was very insightful. I would also like to note that our speaker for the BRIC grant was not able to attend, but I do want to say just a little bit about it, just to provide some context. So this opportunity, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, it supports the types of projects that our speakers talked about today. So if you are interested in implementing green infrastructure to mitigate flooding, or if you're looking at, engaging in a hazard mitigation plan, this might be a good opportunity to consider. It is currently open, but it does work a little differently than other grants where you do need to submit a notice of intent through this state, and then it moves on from there. So it's a little different from other grants where you kind of just directly apply. So just wanted to note that we will work with our presenter to have a recording of the presentation, and then when the recording of this goes out, we will hopefully stitch that in so that you will have that information. So hang tight, we will send information about that grant opportunity. There's also a green infrastructure grant opportunity coming out through the Illinois EPA sometime this spring. Additionally, if you are interested in green infrastructure. So I've also linked our intake form in case you want to learn more about this grant and want to get started. And so with that, I would like to open us to the Q&A portion of this webinar. We have about 10 minutes. And I did see that we did get a couple of questions for Eliana about green infrastructure. So I'm going to go ahead and ask her those, and then please feel free to keep adding your questions in the chat and we will get to them. So for Eliana, what type of specific vegetation would you say is best for rain gardens and stormwater trees?
So, the Illinois native plants are, there are some really great options with these Illinois native plants, and we are always wanting to encourage people to use that in green infrastructure, well, in rain gardens and bioswales. And in the chat, I put a link to the Illinois Groundwork Plant Finder. That is a really nice resource because it will allow you to look at, and there's a selection tool on the side that allows you to say, okay, I need to look at some options for the wettest part of my rain garden. What are my options there? But I want there to be some blooming in the summertime, for example. So you could look at that and then it would pop up and select only the plants that would have those attributes. So that's a really nice tool to help you to find those. For stormwater trees, a lot of times I can mention that floodplain trees are oftentimes used for that. So bald cypress is one that comes up a lot. I put a link in the chat for an article that was written by one of our horticulture educators. We also have forestry specialists within Extension. So go to the Extension website and you can put in some search terms for that to look for some other specific species for consultant arborists. Someone else in the chat had put in some of the other universities, Lewis and Clark, and also SIU have some nice expertise there. And yes, you could always reach out to them for some insights and suggestions and to find what would be best for your own community and your own for your own tree needs.
Thank you so much, Eliana. And I'm curious, what is a first step that you would recommend for communities if they're interested in implementing green infrastructure, but they're just not quite sure where to start?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
What is the first step you would recommend for communities if they want to implement green infrastructure but aren't sure where to start?
Yeah. So that Illinois Groundwork website does have some nice resources in there for to have a greater understanding of green infrastructure. I think it's really nice to look at, and within that website there are some case studies that I would want to point you to. This has been documented in a number of municipalities, and it can help you to have an understanding of what's been done in other municipalities and what has worked really well for people. It's also really helpful to find out some lessons learned from other municipalities in implementing green infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Eliana. We did get a question in the chat asking about the BRIC grant and if it is affected by any kind of federal funding freeze. I will say this situation is continuing to evolve, so I don't think I could give a firm answer, yes or no. All I know is that it is currently open and the process is continuing. So for the time being, it is available and it is worth considering.
Linda, one last thing maybe that I could say about nature-based solutions and green infrastructure is that maintenance is something that is really important for all of these practices. I mean, even for conventional practices for storm sewers, of course, you probably are all very, very well aware that you need to maintain systems, whether they're underground and people don't see them, or they're above ground and they're very visible. But because it is with rain gardens and native plants can be very different kinds of maintenance than, say, mowing lawns. That is a shift that can require and benefit from some training. And so Russell, myself, and some other collaborators are building a green infrastructure maintenance curriculum, and you may be asked in the next month or so to answer a survey on what your needs might be for that. So I'd want to put a plug to please answer the survey if you receive it, and that would help us to know what would best serve the needs for what would go into that curriculum.
Thank you, Eliana. And Russell, do you have anything else you'd like to add for communities getting into hazard mitigation planning? Any advice you would have as they get started?
I would say go look at the new state hazard mitigation plan. that's dated 2023. Look at some of those things. Those goals will be what you're going to base your hazard mitigation plan on. And also, when you're looking at projects, you don't have to go insane, find the most expensive thing in the world. One of our communities actually didn't want, it's a very small community, did not want to have a civil defense siren. So what they did, and it was a community of 250, they went and bought weather radios for everyone. So that is a real project that falls under hazard mitigation planning. And they not only do they buy them, they train the people on how to use them. So I would look at that. I would also keep in mind that like we don't know what's coming down from the administration. So just keep going as you were. Vulnerable populations, something to look at. Nature-based solutions. For Southern Illinois, they are really stressing earthquake awareness. And also for the entire state, wildfires is a brand new disaster category that they have added. So
really appreciate those insights, Russell. That's very helpful. So it looks like we don't really have more questions. So thank you all so much for attending, and thank you so much to our speakers for your time and providing all of this great information. And we hope to see you all in our next webinar, which will be in March.